All right, so this is our second discussion of Midrash, discussing the method of Midrash. Last time we talked about some examples from the Midrash that were excellent entries into sort of developing an approach, developing an attitude towards Midrash, or picking up the clues that the Midrash provides us. I think that this was mine, right? The water was mine. Or was that yours? Okay. I don't want to take anything from you. Yeah, we said before. Yeah, we're everything tonight. We're dedicating Lilu Nishmat to all of the boys that we had a very tragic ending to this story today. There's nothing we can say except that we have to do what we can in this world to create a more just society and to resolve these conflicts with chokhmah and with justice, and to continue to learn the Torah so that we are worthy of Hashem's beracha, that we shouldn't have any more tragedies like this. That's the best that we can do. So this shiur we started last week on Thursday. Now the schedule changed, so it became on Monday, so we doubled up on it, but that's okay. Exploring Midrashim and learning or refining our strategy of picking up the clues that the Midrash encodes for us to be able to understand the text. So last week we talked about a little bit about Sodom, we talked a little bit about Lot, we talked a little about Yosef, Reuven, individuals whom the Midrash really enlightens us, illustrates for us their whole personality in a few words. This week we're going to look at a couple of other stories, because the best way to enter into an understanding of Midrash is through the stories. So the first example is from the story of Rivka and Eliezer. Now I'm calling him Eliezer, even though the Torah calls him Ha'ish. Ha'ish or Ha'eved, depending on which pasuk, right? The person or the servant. It never identifies him as Eliezer, but we're going to assume that it was Eliezer just for simplicity's sake, in accordance with the traditional interpretation of the Pesukim. In any case, we know that when he comes, he creates a test, he devises a test to identify the best possible wife for Yitzchak. What's the test? Go by the well. And he goes by the well, which back then was like going to, I guess now people go to a bar or something. Then they went to the well, and what was the test?
She would ask, can I have some water? And she would give him not only for him, but for the camel. That's
right. She would offer, right, of her own accord, to also provide for the camels. So a great act of chesed. So,
is that the well that was, what's the name, they found the soulmate, what's his name? Yaakov, was it? The well?
Yaakov and Rachel, the same one? Yeah. I think that they connect the two, yeah, but before that, this is the parents. So this is Rivka. So Rivka comes to the well. The Eved or Eliezer says, "Excuse me, could I please have something to drink?" And of course she provides him with drink and also the camels. And then what does he do? And this is the pasuk that we have here. Vahi kasher kilu gimalim lishtot. As soon as the camels were finished drinking, by the way, camels drink a tremendous amount, in case you were wondering. They drink a lot of water. I think we might be one short. You might have to share. Okay, perfect. Right. That's a good problem to have. Next time we'll have more. We like to have the problem of not having enough, but sharing is good. It cultivates friendship. So as soon as she finishes, or the camels rather finish drinking, so he took nezem zav. Nezem is a nose ring, generally, but it's a ring of gold. Beka mishkalo, which is a beka in weight. A beka is a specific measure of that time. Ushne tzimidim al yadea asara zav mishkalam, and 2 bracelets on her hands. 10 zav, 10 gold weights. Okay, exactly how much these measurements are, we can. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of research into them. Those are details that we don't have to get into right now. Of course, the question that any midrashically minded commentary is going to ask is, what's the significance of these very specific weights and measures that are here, right? What is Beka? Beka is, by the way, how much? Does anybody know? Machatzita shekel. Beka la gulgolet, machatzita shekel b'shekel hakodesh. So that's beka is another word for machatzita shekel, the half shekel. So the question, of course, is going to be to the midrashically minded person, what is the reason for giving us these details? Just say he gave her some presents. I mean, why do we have to know that he gave her exactly what was the size of the ring and the weight? Exactly what was the weight in gold of the bracelets? Okay, that's not significant to the story. And a lot of details are omitted from the story. For example, what color hair did she have? Well, we don't know about that. What was she wearing at the time? We don't know about that. So why do we have to know exactly what the weight of these items was? That's what the Midrash is always going to be bothered by. Extraneous details, superfluous details that don't seem to add anything to the story. So what does the Midrash say? One beka represents the half shekel donated by each and every Jew in the Midbar, which was a beka la gulgolet, machatzita shekel b'shekel hakodesh, v'chol ha'over al pikudim. Right? We know that's the measure. Each person gave a half shekel, tallied up the half shekalim, and figured out what the census was. Right? And 2 bracelets correspond to the luchot. Of course. What else? Right? You didn't even have to tell you luchot. And what is asara then? If the 2 luchot, 10 commandments, aseret hadibrot. Once you're taking the 2 bracelets to be the luchot, then of course the 10 fits perfectly. 5 and 5, aseret hadibrot. So that is a very nice connection to make, right? However, the problem is the same kind of problem that we saw in the Midrashim that we explored last week, which is connections can be made, but the question becomes, okay, what's the point of making these connections? Every time that it says 10 in the Torah, is it referring to aseret hadibrot? Every time it says a certain measurement, it's referring to machatzit shekel? That's a stretch. Like we said last time, just because it says agala, wagon, that means it must be talking about egla arufa, about the decapitated cow and the that for a homicide that's unsolved homicide. Every time it says matzah, it has to mean Pesach, that it was on Pesach. So these are good associations. If we're thinking associatively, okay, you see the word beka, either you're going to think of a girl that you know named Becca, or you're going to think of beka with an ayin, you're going to think of machatzita shekel if you're thinking in the Pesukim, right? But asara 10, maybe there's other things that 10 might remind you of besides aseret hadibrot. So why did the Midrash decide to assign here, or to make a connection, a link here, to machatzita shekel and to aseret hadibrot? That's the question that we have to ask as Midrashic scholars, okay? And the way that I told you last week to approach this is the way that we'll try to approach, and I pre-did some of the work for you by making things bold and emphasizing them and all that and giving you a cheat sheet here. Okay? But even without the cheat sheet, you can understand the methodology. So whenever you see a midrash like this that appears to throw something random, so it's throwing something random. It says it's number 10. Must be aseret hadibrot. Well, where did you get that from? Maybe it's just that. Maybe that was just what he brought. So how do you know that it was aseret hadibrot? Why are you bringing that in here? So it's a good question. But you have to look at let's look at the text and see if there's anything in the text that indicates or that could solve for us why at the moment that Eliezer, or whoever the Evet is, let's assume it's Eliezer, is giving the bracelets and the gifts to Rivka. Why is there an association to aseret hadibrot at that moment? Why is there an association to machatzit shekel at that moment? Why is that the time to talk about it? So let's take a look at a little bit further on. Like I said, if you look in the story, whenever you see a midrash like this, you need to look at the story and say, what's the problem in the story, or what's the theme in the story, or what's the pattern in the story that this midrash is identifying for us? Because there will be one. We can't always find it so readily, but when I pre-set it for you, you can see it. When it's not preset, it's there. As I said last time, I haven't cracked the code of every single midrash myself, but I'm showing you a method that could be used to try to solve some of the riddles here. So let's take a look at the text. Moving on. Now you'll notice that what I made bold here, okay, is a certain term that repeats itself, or a certain word in Hebrew that repeats itself again and again, and I bolded it in both Hebrew and in English. So she runs and she tells the house of her mother. In other words, she goes to where the ladies were. Like these divarim, these things. Okay. In other words, she recounts to her mother what just happened. She went to the well. She was simply being a nice person, and all of a sudden she received all these gifts and was told that she has a shidduch. She had no idea. Ule Rivka ach ushmo lavan. And Rivka had a very famous or infamous brother, and his name was Lavan. Vayarot Lavan el ha'ish achutza la'ayin. And Lavan went to this person. He ran to meet this person by the well. Vayikirot et hanezem v'et hatzimidim al yedei achoto. It's very particular what the Torah says. And when he saw the ring and the bracelets on the arm of his sister, and when he heard from Rivka what the man had said, in other words, the whole story, the whole fact that he was there looking for a shidduch, and that she could be the one, that he was coming from Abraham, and he was looking for the family of Abraham. Okay, so she tells him over the story. So all of a sudden, and she said, "Kod diber elai ha'ish." This is what he said. Vayavo el ha'ish v'hinei omed al hagimalim al ayin. And so Lavan comes. Vayomer bo beruch Hashem. Come, blessed one of Hashem. Lama ta'amod b'chutz v'anochi piniti abayit makom lagimalim. Look, I've set up a whole place for you already. I'm so hospitable. Come, stay with us. So, if you're reading the story, what is Lavan really excited about?
His money. The gold.
That's what it sounds like, right? First it says, first he sees the jewelry. Then he hears the story. What does he notice first? The jewelry. And then he runs.
But he runs first. No?
Well, first it says, but it's parenthetical. In other words, it describes that he's running, but he couldn't have run twice, right? It's telling you he ran, but then it's parenthetically telling you why did he run? Because he saw the bracelets and he heard the story. So he said, I'd better go meet this guy right away. Otherwise, how would he have known about the story before he heard from her? He first heard the story, saw the bracelets, then went and said, hey, this person is worth getting to know.
Why didn't the Torah just say it in that order?
I'm not sure. That I'm not sure. But that's certainly what it's happening, because otherwise, how would he have run there and then seen the bracelets? No, it has to fit that way. Yeah, why? I'm not sure.
If the Midrash is saying these measurements and all this stuff allude to the future where the Jewish people get the tablets or whatever, how does it fit into, let's say, her offspring is also Esau?
That's true. Well, let's see how it goes. We'll see how this works out. That's true. But it doesn't necessarily refer to all of her offspring. But let's see what happens next. So we see that there's also an emphasis on the root daber, right? The daber is mentioned many times. Kadivarim ha'ela. What are the aseret hadibrot actually called in the Torah? Aseret hadivarim. Aseret hadivarim. The 10 things. There's a lot of dibur going on. Kod diber elaya ish. This is what the man said to me. He heard divrei Rivka. Okay, now what happens next? He comes into the house. Vayusam nefanav le'echol, and of course, like any good Sephardic family, first thing they do is serve you food. When you come, right, you have to eat, and they force you. Vayomer lo ochal. You put the tuchmeh, whatever, on the table. I don't. I hope not. The Lavan we don't want.
They like the tarofo.
Yeah. So he says, Vayomer lo ochal. He said, I won't eat adim dibarti devarai, until I speak devarai, my words. Vayomer daber, he says, speak. Vayomer eved Avraham anochi, and then he describes how Hashem has blessed his master with everything, and he recounts the whole story. And then on the next page, he says, when he recounts everything, if you look down, vayan lavanu tuel vayomeru me Hashem yatsa davar. They said, from Hashem has this thing come. Lo nuchal daber elecha ra'otov. We can't say anything good, bad or good to you, because it came from hadavar, came from Hashem. And they said, kasher diber Hashem. So you see, the word divrehem, davar, is repeated numerous times in the parasha, both in the verb form and in the noun form. Now, what I would suggest is going on here, and what the Midrash is trying to pull out of here, is that there are two very different dvarim happening in this story. There are two very different perspectives here. A davar, a thing, it's how you name it. It's how you label it. It's how you think about it. Okay? What is Lavan seeing here? What is Betuel seeing here? A good business deal, right? It's a good business deal. Back then, a shidduch was mainly a business deal. It was uniting two families. This is a girl. This is a boy that's coming from a very wealthy person, very successful. looking for a bride for his son. It's like marrying royalty. It's a good deal. So Lavan is looking at bracelets, and he's looking at rings, and he's thinking about the whole story. And Eliezer, of course, plays up the material wealth of Abraham. And if you look in the story, you notice the changes that he makes in the story to make it less insulting to them and all that. But that's a whole other piece. But one might see when they go to Rivka and they say to Rivka, would you like to go with this person? Remember, at first they said, well, let her stay with us for a little bit longer before we make a commitment. We want to get ready first. And Eliezer says, no, she has to come right now. She has to come with me now. And she says, I'll go. So, being that Lavan is very impressed with the material credentials of Abraham and Yitzchak, and being that we're after all talking about women and a young woman, and we know diamonds are a girl's best friend, or whatever the saying is, right? It wasn't diamonds, it was gold, but the same concept. So what might one think? In other words, why is Rivka going so fast? She's leaving. She just met this guy 5 minutes ago. This guy just showed up a few minutes ago, and all of a sudden Rivka is running off with him to an unknown place to meet some unknown guy and marry him. It's a little bit of a strange story. So is it logical? In other words, would it be logical to suggest that Rivka said, hey, I get to be a princess now, because I'm going to live with I'm going to marry a rich son of a rich father, and I'm going to be living the high life. Which certainly is exactly what Lavan thinks. Yes?
Did she know anything about, Abraham and Yitzhak and how, they're, forget the money for a second, but they're, high-quality people?
Well, that, I think, is really what the Midrash is trying to say. In other words, people knew what Abraham was about. They did know. He was famous. He was certainly famous by this time. He was well known. Okay, so everybody knew what he was really about. The question is, why do you want to be attached to Abraham Avinu? Okay? Some people will say, if you ask a friend of mine that I know from my previous community, his father was the ambassador to a country called Micronesia. You ever heard of Micronesia before? Neither have most people. However, one of the unique things about Micronesia, if you look on if you look on Wikipedia or you research it, Micronesia, one of the very unusual things about this very small country, is that in the UN, aside from the United States of America, they're one of the only countries that always votes in favor of Israel. Always supports Israel, and they have a relationship with technology. They develop technology. They have a connection to the state of Israel. They always vote. They're not a Jewish country. Okay? They're Christians, but they always vote with Israel. And so my friend, who's Jewish, and his father was the ambassador there for some time. These are the interesting people you meet in Washington D.C. So he once asked one of the government officials in Micronesia and said to him, why is it that you're not Jewish, you have no connection with Yahadut, you have no, all the countries in the world, they hate Israel, they're always voting against Israel. Why are you voting for Israel? He said, it says in the Bible, anybody who blesses Israel is going to be blessed. We want to be blessed, so we're going to bless the Jewish people so we can be blessed. Okay? That's the reason. They believe, in biblical principles, or that they're going to be blessed because they blessed Israel. So they want to always vote for them and support them. So this is one reason. In other words, what are they worried about? They want the blessing. In other words, they want the gashmiut. They want to succeed. They believe that God is going to bless them, and maybe it's worked out for them, so they feel that it's working. So they continue in that way. But the point is that there is a material advantage in being associated with the Jewish people. Or, for example, it says in the Gemara, and the Rambam brings this even. Rambam brings this in the Halacha, that in the days of in Yemot HaMashiach, you can't convert to Judaism, because then it's going to be too much of a material benefit. And during the times of David and Shlomo, they were very, very suspect if anybody wanted to come convert to Judaism, because they said, well, you probably want to do that because we're so prosperous. And that's exactly why the state of Israel now is very concerned, has issues with Giur, because they're always worried that people just want to convert because they want to get out of whatever country they're in and come to Israel. It's a much better place to be than many places in the world, most places in the world. So here too, one might say, oh, Rivka is, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? If her family is only interested in this shidduch, in this deal, because Avraham Avinu is a wealthy man, then perhaps Rivka is also only excited for that reason. And therefore the Midrash finds a way to tell you that there are two dvarim here. There are the divrei ha'eved, right? That he keeps saying, these are my dvarim. I have to speak my dvarim. And it says, and they say, Me Hashem yatsa davar. From Hashem came the thing. But they have their own dvarim, their own ideas about what the benefit is of this partnership. So the question, of course, is Rivka. How do we look at Rivka at the beginning? Is the reason why Rivka is going to Yitzchak because she thinks she's cashing in? Or is the reason why Rivka is going with Yitzchak because she had something in her neshama, something inside her that was attracted to the spirituality of Avraham Avinu and of Yitzchak Avinu? And that's what the Midrash is trying to tell you by, don't think that just like Lavan saw the bracelets and he saw the market value and that's why he wanted the deal, that Rivka also saw that. No, she saw it, she heard the message of the servant of Abraham, which was that Hashem is blessing him and he's succeeding in his spiritual mission, not because of the material things. And the way that they do that, the way the Chachamim found a remez in the Torah to show you that there's a hint in the Torah from the language of Beka la Gulgolet, that's about the Jewish people, the creation of the Jewish people, the Machatzita Shekel, the creation of the Mishkan, the counting of the Jewish people and the creation of the Mishkan. You have the Aseret HaDibrot, that this is what Rivka saw. She saw beyond the material things. Otherwise, you can see the beginning of the story of Yitzchak Avinu as being about a gold-digging young woman who heard about a rich guy and decided to go on the trip with Eliezer. But that's not what we see. That as soon as she gets there, she's so impressed by the spiritual stature of Yitzchak, she practically falls off of the donkey, and off of the camel rather. And then, as soon as she comes in, the beracha returns to the house of Abraham, and everything starts, and Yitzchak sees her greatness and immediately loves her and is able to be consoled from the loss of his mother. So you see, she was a spiritual personality in her own right. She wasn't just somebody who was looking for a ticket to fame and fortune. And so that is really what the Midrash is trying to say. By taking the very thing that Lavan looked at and had dollar signs in his eyes, and saying, yes, she also saw that, but she saw Aseret HaDibrot. She saw Beka la Gulgol. She saw the future. She knew that Avraham Avinu had a mission, and she wanted to be part of that. And that's why she went along. And you can only appreciate the Midrash when you see that the Midrash has two people sitting across the table with very different agendas. You have the Lavan side, and you have the Avraham side. And the question is, which side is Rivka really on? So by encoding the Midrash that she received Aseret HaDibrot on her arm, right? She received Machatzita Shekel. That's what she was seeing. There's another Midrash there that Rashi quotes that I didn't put in here. That when Eliezer asks two things, he first asks. Can I see the Chumash? Actually, I want to say the exact words. I don't want to mess up. The first thing that he asks there are two questions. He wants to know if there's a place where he can stay. Hold on. I don't want to misquote. So, hold on. So he asks her, first of all, he wants to know, tell me whose daughter you are, right? Bat miat. Hagidin aliyah, yesh bet avich makom lanu lanin. So he wants to know, first of all, is there a place for... First of all, what's your family? And second of all, do you have a place for me to stay? And he answers and says, well, first of all, I am Bat Betuel, the son of Milcah, etc. And then she says, we have lots of provisions and lots of space for you. Right? So what does Rashi quote the Midrash says about Rivka? Does anybody remember? Thank you. He says, she answered al rishon rishon ve'al acharon acharon. She answered the first question first and the last question last. So one could look at that and say, well, he's stating the obvious. I mean, you could see the order of the question, you see the order of the answer. The first is answered first, the second is answered second. So what's the chidush? The chidush is in Pirkei Avot. What does it say one of the signs of the Chacham is? Meshiv al rishon rishon ve'al acharon acharon. He answers the first thing first and the last thing last. In other words, if you ask a Chacham questions, he answers them in the proper order. And she answered them in the proper order, which is a sign that she's Isha Chachama. She's a wise woman. So why is Rashi pointing that out? Not just to state the obvious, but to connect it to Pirkei Avot, where it says that's one of the signals that you're dealing with a wise person. And so therefore she's not going to be seduced by the material things. She's a deeper person. And that's what the Midrash is trying to show us. Not to make a mistake and think that Rivka is cut from the same cloth as Lavan. And it's a beautiful way to bring it out. So let's look at another example. This example is great not only for this Midrash, but just in general as a matter of study of Parashat Noach, which is one of the most difficult parashiot to study from a literary standpoint. We all know the famous Midrash. Noach ish tzaddik, tamim haya bedorotav et Elohim italech Noach. Everybody knows Noach is an ish tzaddik. He was righteous bedorotav, in his generations, which means what?
Another generation.
Oh, what does it mean? He lived for many generations because he's very old. That it does mean that, yes. What else?
I think there's one person says it means that if he would have lived in other generations, it wouldn't have been anything special.
Right.
It's just because the generation is so bad. But then another opinion I think says that no, because the generation was so bad, it was very hard to be good. So he was great.
Right. It's like the argument that they make for kids in inner city school. Right? Let's say a kid in inner city school who, his mother has holds 3 jobs and they live in a rundown place and is just a single mother and he's in a violent neighborhood and all that. If he can get an 85 on the test under those circumstances, imagine what he would get if he was in a upper class neighborhood where he had nice schools and stable environment. Right? It's the same kind of logic. Right, so if in this environment he does well, so that's one of the arguments that they give, to try to allow, to look at people's circumstances. If they come from a very bad home and they're able to even get a B, if they were coming from a better home, it could be that they would have an A+. So that's one interpretation. The other interpretation is no, that the only reason why he got a B was because they graded on a curve and everybody else was really was getting an F. But if he were in a more competitive school, he would be getting an F too. That's basically the two sides of the argument about Noach. And here's the Midrash actually. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nehemiah disagree. Rabbi Yehuda says in his generation he was considered righteous. It's all relative. But in the generation of Moshe, he would have been nothing. The other possibility is no. If he was able in his circumstance, in such a bad environment, to be such a tzaddik, imagine what he would have been if he had a good environment. Two possible ways of looking at the interplay between environment and individual achievement, right? And we could apply that in many different areas in life, really. We can always make that argument. If somebody is a good baseball player on a bad team, you might think, well, if he were on a good team, he'd be even better because he'd have support of all the other good players. Or it could be that it only looks like he's a good player because he's surrounded by horrible players. But if he were on a good team, he would be benched all the time. So that's the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nehemiah. So I would ask you a question like this: What leads you to believe that Noach is anything less than a perfectly fine tzaddik? Forgetting about the postscript where he gets drunk and everything.
The text of Moshe.
What gives you that?
In his generations.
In his generations, right. So just that word is what they are grappling over, right?
He still calls him a tzaddik.
He calls him a tzaddik.
Hashem calls him a tzaddik.
Right. He calls him a tzaddik. That's a compliment that few of us receive from Hashem. Right. It's a nice compliment. There's no question. You can see certain things that he does that seem exemplary and good. He faithfully carries out the mitzvot that he's given. Some things are bad at the end, but nobody's perfect. Now, what I'd like to point out to you, and I want to just preface this by saying this solves many problems in Parashat Noach. You will come across people who will say certain, for lack of a better word, heretical views about Parashat Noach, that it's really 2 stories and they're put together because it repeats a lot. Parashat Noach repeats itself a lot, or seems to, with different details each time. And so sometimes people will look at this parasha and say, hey, it looks like somebody hodgepodged together a bunch of different stories and it's not one story. If you read it correctly, though, it actually fits perfectly as one story, so we're going to see. And it all has to do with the names of Hashem. There are whenever something is repeated, it's repeated with a change in the name of Hashem. Can I actually have the Chumash back again? Because I want to see the Hebrew, because the English is good for when it's not readily translatable, but this is easier for me. So in Parashat Noach, you start out with there are two names used for Hashem. One is called Elohim, or we say Elokim if we don't want to pronounce the name too much, right? That is God, generic God. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. The creator of the universe called Elohim. And then you have what you might call the personal name of Hashem, right? The four-letter name of Hashem. The tetragrammaton, they call it in English, in fancy English, right? The name that we don't say, that we say as Amonai, or Adoshem, or however you want to say it without having to say it. Okay? We use that name as a substitute for the Yud Vav name. Now, in Parashat Noach, we find some commandments and some descriptions with the name Elohim, which we know as the natural God, the God of nature, the God of creation. Like Vaychal Elohim bayom hashve'i melachto asher asa. And we sometimes see Hashem. Now, the name of Hashem, the particular name of Hashem, is a name that we find mostly in the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. That's where it says Ushmi Hashem lo nodati lahem. That was the big thing, was introducing the name Hashem in Mitzrayim. In Bereshit, a lot of it is Elohim, a lot of times. Now let's take a look at Noach and see why is this significant. It's significant because the repetition in the story. So first we have Elohim said to Noach, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them, and behold, I'm about to destroy them with the earth. Okay, this is in the English that I have in front of you. And what does he instruct him to do as in the bold? And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, and keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds after their kind, of the animals after their kind, of every creeping thing on the ground after its kind. And 2 of every kind will come to you, and you should take for yourself some of all the food which is edible, gather it to yourself, and it will be food for you and for them. Okay, so how many of each animal does he have to bring? 2. And he has to get salad for everybody. Everyone's a vegetarian, right? So it's for everybody. Now, then Hashem said to Noach. Now this is the funny thing. Hashem is the Yud Hey name of Hashem, right? The 4-letter name of Hashem, which is usually considered almost like his personal name, so to speak, the one that we don't really pronounce. When Hashem says to Noach, he says it differently. What does he command him this time? Vayomer Hashem leNoach, bo ata v'chol beitecha la'teva ki otcha ra'iti tzadik lefanai b'dor hazeh. You and all of the people with you should come into the teva, because you're the one that I've seen as a tzaddik. And now all of a sudden you change the instructions. Mikol ha'behema te'ora tikach lecha shiv'a ish v'ishto. You should take 7 pair of male and female of each kind of animal that is tehorah. That is the ones that we would call the kosher animals, right? Behemot kisherot, behemot teorot. You take 7 of each, okay? And of the ones that are not clean, it uses in English, a male and a female, meaning only 2. And the birds, 7 male and female. So wait a second. So Noach did all this work of bringing 2 and 2, and then he's like, you didn't tell me I needed, another 6 pair of each one? I mean, I have to go back out there again, and, why didn't you tell me the first time? Hashem changed names and he changed instructions. The first instruction under Elohim was 2 of each. Second instruction under Hashem was 7 of the Tehorot. What happened? So that's why people say, this is like a hodgepodge of different stories. There's one story by the name Hashem, one story by the name Elohim, and they don't fit together. But we're going to see they do fit together. And then we see another confusion. Then Noach and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him entered the ark because of the water of the flood. Of clean animals and animals that are not clean, and birds and everything that creeps on the ground, they went into the ark with Noach. 2, they went by 2s, male and female, as Elohim commanded Noach. Wait a second. Is he getting different instructions from different sources here? Now it's saying whether they were clean or unclean, 2. Well, didn't you just tell me before 7? If they were Tehorot, 7 pair, which is a total of 14. Now you're telling me, no, clean and unclean, only 1 pair. And that's what Elohim said, and that's true. That is what Elohim said before, under the name Elohim. That was what Hashem said. But under the name Hashem, he overrided that, and he said, no, now you have to do, and I have to have 7 pair of the Torah. So what happened? And then it says, on the very same day, Noach and Shem and Ham and Yefet, the sons of Noach, and Noach's wife, and the 3 wives of the son with them, entered the ark. They and every beast of its kind, and all the cattle after the kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind. Okay? And all sorts of birds. They went into the ark by Noach by twos. Okay? Male and female, as God had commanded him. That God is Elohim. But Hashem sealed it behind him. So wait a second. What's going on here? And we keep changing the name of Hashem back and forth. In that pasuk, it uses both. Why is Hashem closing the door behind him? He didn't do the job. He only brought 2 of each. It sounds like. So it's a little confusing. It goes back and forth. But then it says, Vayiskor Elohim et Noach. And we know this pasuk because it's actually in the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. Vayiskor Elohim et Noach, right? And all the beasts and all the cattle were with him. That's Elohim. And then Elohim says to Noach, go out of the ark, you, your wife, your sons' wives with you, bring out every living thing, all flesh that's with you, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, etc., etc. That's Elohim. That is the generic God. But then in the next piece it says, then Noach built an altar to Hashem. And what did he do? He took of every clean animal and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings. Oh, wait a second. Whoa, wait a second. If he only brought 2 of each, he's going to have a problem now. Because he just offered one as a korban. That's the end of that species. Right? So obviously he must have had 7 pair. Right? There was once like a commercial. I don't remember what it was a commercial for, which means they didn't do good advertising. But there was once a commercial where they showed Noach going onto the teva, and then it was supposed to be funny. I don't remember what it was about though. And he gets onto the boat, and then there's like a fly or something bothering him, and he kills it. And then he says, "Oh shoot, I have to go back out again. Get another." In any case, so he makes an altar to Hashem, and of course he brings the beimot kashirot, he brings the torot. So there's obviously more left. And then it says, "And God blessed Noach and his sons." So in the first one it says, Hashem said to himself, "I will never again curse the ground on account of man, for the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth." But then it says, Elohim blessed Noach and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, and the fear of you is going to be over the beast of the earth and the bird of the sky and everything that creeps on the ground, etc., etc." But then Elohim again speaks to Noach and says, "I make a covenant with you that I'm not going to destroy all flesh, and I'm not going to destroy you and every living. And I make this covenant not only with you, Noach." Right before it said, Hashem said, "I'm never going to curse the ground on account of man." Right? But now it says, Elohim says, "I'm making a covenant with you and your descendants and every living creature and the birds and the cattle." The cattle say, "Hey, wait, we didn't sign up for this. We want a lawyer." You know, how is Noach making a covenant for all the creatures? That's what he's doing. And what's the covenant? The rainbow, right? That's the sign of the covenant between me and you and every living creature. And I'm going to look upon it and remember the covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that's on the earth. Okay, and God says, this is the sign of the covenant that's between me and all the flesh that's on the earth. Isn't that interesting? So sometimes you'll notice, and this is what I wanted to point out to you, whenever the word Elohim is used, whenever the creator, whenever Hashem as the creator is used, Noach and his family and all of the animals are lumped together as one. And whenever the name Hashem is used, Noach is singled out. So Hashem is used when Noach is told to get 7 of each rather than 2. Because 7 of each is not significant for the species, for perpetuating the species. It's not biologically significant. You only need 2, a male and a female, to continue the species. But for human use, you need more of the behemot teorot, of the ones that are going to be consumed and used for korbanot. You need more. When it says that the animals come to the teva, it says Elohim, because that was everybody. But when Hashem closes the door to seal it, ba'ado, for the sake of Noach, it uses the name Hashem. When it says that he remembered them and all the beasts and cattle, it says Elohim. When it says that they should all go out, the children and the wives and the animals and the birds and everything else, it says Elohim, because that's the creator, that includes everything. But when Noach builds an altar, he builds it to Hashem, because that's the personal relationship between Bnei Adam, between human beings and Hashem. And then when Hashem blesses them that they should multiply and be fruitful, he blesses them and he blesses everybody else. And when he makes the covenant with Elohim, he makes the covenant not only with Noach, but with all of the beasts of the field and all of the birds and all of the cattle, because it's Elohim. So what you see that's very interesting in the story is that it's not that there are really 2 stories. is that there are two dimensions to the story. Just like in the story of Adam and Chava, there are two dimensions to the story. There is what you might call Hashem as the creator, and Hashem as the one that has a specific relationship with human beings. Hashgacha pratit, like we talked about the other day. Hashgacha pratit, hashgacha klalit. General and specific providence. So there are two goals in the Mabul, or in the saving of Noach. One is, he's the only human, like they say, even if you were the last man on earth, I wouldn't marry you. Right? So that's what Noach's wife said, you are, So those were the last human beings on earth. So from the perspective of perpetuating the species, Noach is serving a certain role as just, he happens to be the last man on earth. His family happens to be the last family on earth. Just like it was the last two horses on earth, and the last two, elephants, I don't know, whatever other animals were in that area that he brought with him. So each one of these animals has to survive, not because Hashem said, I have a special covenant with the lion. I want the lion to... Each one is because it's representative of its species, to perpetuate the species. However, there's also an element of the story of Noach, which is specific providence for Noach. He's a tzaddik. He deserves special divine intervention. He deserves a special beracha. He deserves a special covenant between him and Hashem. He makes a mizbeach to serve God as a human being, not just as a member of creation. As a human being, he's speaking to Hashem. And he has the covenant with Hashem that Hashem says, I'm not going to destroy the world anymore on account of Adam. But then he says, I make a covenant with everybody and all the beasts and all the animals, and I'm also not going to destroy them. Well, why doesn't my covenant cover for them? Noach could ask. Oh, because that's a covenant with human beings, with you. But I'm also making a covenant with my creation that I'm never going to do that again. So there are two parallel stories. It's the story of the saving of creation, so that the species are saved, so that all of the different beasts and animals are saved, including human beings. We're also part of the animal kingdom, as painful as it is for us to realize that sometimes. We are. On the other hand, it's also a story about Hashgacha Pratit, about Noach. Noach as an individual tzaddik, that Hashem is saving Noach. So whenever it says Elohim, it's talking about Noach as just the representative of his species. He's part of the creation. Whenever it says Hashem, it's talking about Noach as an individual. So with that in mind, now that you see that there are two tracks, so you can ask yourself, wait a second here. Was Noach saved really because he was such a great tzaddik? Was he such an outstanding tzaddik that he would have deserved this salvation in his own right? Or was it only because he also happened to be the last man on earth? Right? And that's, in other words, how do the two stories play off of each other? You see that there's two dimensions to the story. Is it that really this is a story about the saving of all of the creation, including mankind, and Noach just happened to be the only one who could represent mankind because he was the least bad? So he was a tzaddik relative to his time, so he was the one selected to perpetuate the species, basically. But essentially, the story is about perpetuating the species, or no? It's really also a story about Noach being deserving of special divine providence. And if he had lived in the times of Abraham, he would have been even greater. He deserved the teva and all of the communication with Hashem and everything on his own. He would have deserved it because he was a great tzaddik. He also served as the vehicle for perpetuating the human race. Or no, it's the other way around. Really, this story is about creation take two, right? Hashem covers the earth with water again, like it was in Sheshet Yemei Bereshit. The water recedes again, like it did in the 6 days of creation. Plants come back, then animals come back, and people come back onto the scene just like they did in the 6 days of creation. It's creation take two. And it happened to be that in casting for this role, the only choice Hashem had was Noach. If he could have taken Avraham Avinu, he surely would have. Right? So that's what the Midrash, in other words, that Midrash about was Noach really a great tzaddik, or was he just relative to his time, is really reading this entire story. It's really reading the entire story. What's the story about? Is the story a story about Noach? Like you read the story about Abraham. What's the story about Abraham? It's about Abraham. Abraham is a great person. He towers above his age. So it's really a story about him. And then he creates a nation. A nation comes from him. Is Noach like Abraham? It's really a story about him as an individual? Or is Noach like Adam and Chava? It's really a story about a new beginning. Noach is the second Adam. He's going to perpetuate the species. And Hashem, in selecting who was going to perpetuate the species, chose the best that the world had to offer at that particular time. Because why choose anything less than that? That's the question that the Midrash is grappling with. But you can see what a deep reading, in other words, what a careful reading of the entire story is necessary to appreciate what the Midrash is trying to get at. It's not that the Midrash just jumped out of thin air, but the Midrash is very much based on a sense that there are two dimensions to the story. And the question is, which is the dominant one? And how should we read the story? Should we read the story as a universalistic story, where Noach is simply the one cast for the role? Or should we read it as a story about an individual who was saved in his own merit? And together with being saved in his own merit, the world was saved as well. He went and saved the world as well. That's the question that the Midrash is grappling with, but it's rooted in a clear understanding of these two elements of the story. Now, because we've run overtime, and I know that I'm going to get a watch tapping soon, well, we're going to leave the third example that I had for next time, Be'ezrat Hashem. But I'll let you guys have like a 2-minute break, and then we'll come back for Gemara.